Thank you for tuning into this first video on policing and law enforcement. Let's dive in. And to start things off, we're going to talk about responsibilities of law enforcement. Just like previous units and future units, we start off with kind of the goals or what that entity does. And when we're talking police and law enforcement, there's a lot of different things. First of all, they enforce laws. So they make sure that people are following the laws, and if they're not, they charge them potentially with a crime, or they give them some sort of warning. They make them aware of those types of laws. That's kind of the key part that they often get seen doing in a lot of TV shows and movies and all those crime shows that are on TV these days. But aside from that, police officers do a lot of services on top of that. We'll talk about community policing later on in this unit. And a big part of community policing is being out there in the community, interacting with other people, doing traffic. So traffic guidance, providing people with directions. Let's say you're lost and you need help. A police officer might be able to help you out with that. Let's say there's a lost kid. A lot of times when I see maybe a live PD, they might be helping people find some sort of lost kid. Police officers are always working to help out community members if they need to. And not to mention, they tend to be the first people to respond to like a car crash or some sort of injured person. So when someone's injured, police officers tend to be the first ones there, and they have to be prepared to do first aid and securing the scene from different traffic and whatnot that might be going on. And that's just part of the services they provide. Certainly, there's a lot more that they can do. Aside from those two elements, certainly you see law enforcement preventing crime. They're out there trying to stop crimes before they happen, but also trying to preserve peace. Police officers can get brought in when things get out of hand, when there's riots, when there's protests that are getting out of hand, and they may be called in to stop that or to prevent it from getting any further damage or whatnot at the scene. Now, how to become a police officer. We're going to talk about this a little bit in class and talk about agility tests and different tests to prep you for police work. And it's going to be something important to realize that different states have different rules, and the federal government has different rules. So to become a police officer at different levels kind of depends. There's different things everywhere. For example, in Wisconsin, you're required to have a 2-year degree in law enforcement to be anywhere. And that 2-year degree program is going to go through a lot of the physical training that you have to accomplish, as well as the thought process that you might have to take on, or the legal aspects you might have to take on to be a police officer. Other states require a police academy, where you would go off to almost a militaristic program that would teach you how to become a police officer. Some states don't have any of those requirements and say as long as you pass a test, you can become a police officer. And that test is typically like an agility test. It's proving that you're fit enough to become a police officer. And a lot of police stations, may have something like this. They may have a required agility program to keep their job. They can all have stuff like that because you have to be fit enough to be a police officer to do the job. And when we watch different programs in class, we'll talk about the different elements that are kind of required to be a police officer. For example, they want them to be able to run a short amount of distance. They want them to be physically fit enough to do sit-ups and push-ups. They may set up an obstacle course with a number of different things, like a firing section where you might be shooting a gun. They could have climbing or window entry. They could have a balance beam. They could have dragging a weight. All things that might come up in the line of work. They might have to drag a body away from a car. They might have to shoot their gun. They might have to climb through a window. They might have to be able to balance on some sort of beam to rescue someone. And of course, being able to carry something or somebody away from a scene. Aside from that, there are typical requirements to become a police officer. For example, they typically require you to be a U.S. citizen, not have any felonies. They don't want a felon working for the police department that might go back to their felon ways. They might have connections with other criminals, and that might not be necessarily a good thing to have. Typically, you have to have a driver's license. They don't typically require you to have a motorcycle license, but they may train you in riding a motorcycle, and they may require you to ride a bicycle, for example, at events like a fair or going through a park. There typically is an age requirement to secure some sort of maturity in the individual being hired. And of course, they might have different fitness and eyesight requirements too. Aside from that, there are other possible requirements that different police departments may have. For example, they'll have background checks and credit checks. Why would they have a credit check? I often get asked, well, what if you're a police officer that's in a lot of debt and someone that is in trouble, like caught smuggling drugs, might offer a bribe, and that police officer might be under more financial pressure to kind of cave to one of those outside entities. So a police officer should be in good, financial backing, good as far as their background. They may ask to interview, friends or the spouse of the individual, trying to make sure that they don't have any connections to, criminals or crime in any way. They may have a lie detector test. Now, a lie detector might not be perfectly capable to be used in the court, but you certainly could use it with hiring practices for a police officer and ask them some big questions there. Typically, they do require a high school diploma, and occasionally they do require that 2-year degree like Wisconsin does. Now, lastly, I did mention that there is this police academy that in many states they send people that want to be police officers off to. It's very militarized, it's very controlled. They get taught everything with different scenarios. So they'll learn how to search a building, they'll learn how to do seizure, they'll learn how to process paperwork, they'll learn how to arrest someone, how to interrogate someone. They'll go through different crime scenes and practice interviewing skills. They'll practice not disturbing a crime scene, so not leaving behind any of their DNA or footprints or fingerprints. They'll learn how and when to use weapons and different types of weapons. They'll get training on pepper spray and tasers and all that type of stuff, all in one setting. It is very militarized, so it's almost like you're dealing with a drill sergeant telling you what to do. But oftentimes that can be very, successful for a lot of people. You do get trained in stuff like self-defense as well, first aid, kind of the stuff you would expect a police officer to need to be able to do. But it isn't a college program. It's just an academy where you're being trained over a couple weeks on this field. And here's some photos from different police academies as they're getting trained and working on different skills and working on different strength developments. That's all for this video. Tune in on the next one where we'll talk about discretion.